January 29th, 1990, Santiago, Chile. 49 men vanished from a maximum security prison. And the craziest part? They used spoons to dig through solid earth for 18 months. They were political prisoners of Augusto Pinochet's military dictatorship, members of the Manuel Rodriguez Patriotic Front. On the night of January 29, 1990, they crawled through a 60-meter tunnel dug beneath the Santiago public jail and disappeared into the darkness along the Mapoche River. But this isn't just a story about a tunnel escape. It's about the 55 tons of dirt they hid inside the prison ceiling without anyone noticing. The informant who almost destroyed everything on the night of the escape, and the one detail that made this the largest prison break in Chilean history. One of the escapees got stuck at the tunnel exit, too big to squeeze through. Guards found him wedged in a 20-inch hole, while 42 others vanished into the Santiago night. This is how 49 political prisoners pulled off the most spectacular jailbreak Chile had ever seen, using nothing but spoons, plastic bottles, and 18 months of patience. The story began in 1988, 2 years before the escape. Inside the Santiago public jail, a man named Miguel Montesino sat in his cell and studied the walls. He was a member of the Manuel Rodriguez Patriotic Front, the armed wing of the Communist Party of Chile, a trained guerrilla fighter, and he was serving time for opposing the Pinochet dictatorship. Montino wasn't alone. The Santiago public jail held over 120 political prisoners. Many of them were accused of the most audacious act in Chilean resistance history, the 1986 assassination attempt on General Augusto Pinochet himself. 5 of Pinochet's bodyguards had died in the ambush. 10 of the prisoners faced the death penalty for their roles. 3 others faced life imprisonment. How do you escape when the government wants you dead? For Montino, the answer had always been the same. Since the moment of his arrest, he had been planning a way out. He believed that every political prisoner had a moral duty to escape. It wasn't a choice, it was an obligation. In early 1988, he gathered 3 trusted men, Manuel Fuenzalita, Luis Belmar, Hugo Nuleo. 4 men in a cell, whispering about the impossible. They had already attempted an escape from another prison, the penitentiary of Santiago. But before they could execute their plan, the authorities transferred them to the Santiago public jail. The regime had prepared this prison as a high-security facility for what they called subversive prisoners. Pinochet himself had declared that no subversive would ever escape from his prisons. Montesino intended to prove him wrong. The first step was observation. For weeks, the 4 men studied the layout, the cell blocks, the guard rotations, the walls, the floors. They mapped every corridor, every blind spot, every weakness. And then Montesino found what he was looking for. Cell number 4, gallery 78, ground floor. Beneath that cell, the earth was soft enough to dig, and above the cell block, there was a ceiling space, an attic area between the ceiling and the roof, large enough to store something. The question was whether it was large enough to store 55 tons of dirt. What would happen if someone noticed? What if a guard decided to check the ceiling? The Santiago public jail sat in the heart of downtown Santiago, 8 blocks from the presidential palace, surrounded by guard towers, armed sentries, searchlights that swept the compound every night, snipers positioned on elevated platforms with clear sightlines across the prison yard. The facility held over 400 prisoners under the anti-terrorist law. They were monitored around the clock. Surprise inspections happened without warning. Guards would burst into cells, searching every corner, every crack, every possible hiding spot. Anyone caught breaking the rules would be dragged to the black rooms, beaten, isolated for a week. But the prison had a peculiar duality. Inside the walls, prisoners enjoyed a degree of freedom that seemed almost contradictory. They could play football in the yard, watch television, cook meals, play guitar, read books. The atmosphere resembled something closer to a university dormitory than a maximum security prison. This was deliberate, a psychological tactic of the regime. Give them just enough freedom to make them complacent. Remind them constantly that escape was impossible. How do you dig a 60-meter tunnel beneath a prison that never stops watching? Montino was an architect of rebellion. He calculated everything. The tunnel would need to run from cell 4 in gallery 78 beneath the prison floor, under the street outside, over the concrete dome of the Santiago Metro tunnel running below, and emerge at an abandoned railway station on the other side. 60 meters. That was the distance. Roughly the length of 2 Olympic swimming pools through solid earth with no power tools, no heavy equipment, nothing but their hands, spoons, kitchen utensils, and one smuggled smuggled screwdriver. But the tunnel was only half the problem. They would need to remove approximately 55 tons of earth. That was 10 truckloads of dirt. Every grain of it had to be hidden inside the prison without a single guard noticing. The ceiling space above Gallery 78 became their answer. They would carry the dirt in bags, climb to the upper floor, and pack it into the attic above the cells, layer by layer, night after night, for as long as it took. They started in mid-1988. 4 men, 1 screwdriver, and a hole in the floor of cell 4. The first challenge was the entrance. They needed to break through the cell floor and create a removable cover that could be replaced quickly during inspections. Using cement residue from the digging, they mixed a block that fit perfectly into the hole, covered it with debris, made it look untouched. A guitarist among the prisoners was recruited early. His job was critical. Every time the digging started, he would sit outside the cell and play loud enough to mask the sound of scraping and hammering. Song after song, hour after hour. If a guard approached, he would switch to a specific tune, a signal, stop everything. Did the guards ever wonder why the same man played guitar outside the same cell every single day? By the 3rd month, the team had grown to 6, then 8, then 12. Montesino organized them into 3 combat units with the command structure of 5 leaders. They operated like a military operation because that was exactly what it was. Day shifts ran with 3 men digging and 3 on lookout. Night shifts had 2 men on watch. The diggers crawled into the narrow tunnel barely 60 centimeters wide, roughly the width of a man's shoulders. They scraped at the earth with spoons, with kitchen knives, with broken handles, with anything they could find. Their fingers bled, some broke. The dirt removal was its own operation. 2 men would fill bags, 3 would stand watch. 1 inside the cell, 1 outside the door, 1 roaming as a mobile lookout. They carried the bags to the upper floor and packed the dirt into the ceiling space, concealing it behind wooden planks they had brought in under the pretense of renovating their cells. By day 77, Montano measured the tunnel's progress. He was disappointed. At this rate, the tunnel would take years to complete. They needed more men, more hands, more shifts. The risk of exposure grew with every new recruit, but there was no other way. What if one of them talked? What if the wrong person found out? On day 86, Montano made a decision. He gathered the prisoners who were facing the death penalty, showed them the tunnel, explained every detail of the plan. These men had nothing to lose, a death sentence or a tunnel. The choice was simple. They all agreed immediately. The team expanded to 20, then 24. The work accelerated, 2-hour shifts per person during the day. They took the smallest precautions to avoid detection, washing dirt from their hands and bodies after every shift, maintaining their social routines, playing football, watching television, acting normal. They created a second access hole between the ground floor and the first floor, a direct route for moving dirt. No more carrying bags through the stairway where guards could stop them. One close call nearly ended everything early. A team member was carrying a bag of tunnel dirt to the upper floor when a guard stopped him in the corridor, asked to see what was inside. The dirt was hidden in the bottom compartment, covered by personal belongings on top. The guard examined the bag, seconds stretched into hours. Then the guard waved him through. He had only wanted to sell him contraband magazines. The digger exhaled. His hands were still shaking when he reached the attic. The system became efficient, almost mechanical. But then came the close calls. Day 205. Work was proceeding as usual. A digger was deep inside the tunnel. And then, without warning, the entire police force arrived for a surprise inspection. Montesino's blood ran cold. The digger was underground. The tunnel entrance was exposed. Dirt was scattered across the cell floor. They needed more than 10 minutes to clean up and seal everything. They didn't have 10 minutes. The lookouts moved first. Several prisoners rushed outside to confront the police. One of them deliberately insulted the guards, started a fight. Fists flew, bodies hit the ground. Chaos erupted in the yard. Inside the cell, hands moved at desperate speed, pulling the digger out, sweeping the dirt, fitting the block back into the floor, pressing it into place. The guards were at the door. Had they sealed it in time? The door opened. The guards looked in, saw nothing unusual, moved on. Outside, the prisoners who had started the fight were stripped of their clothes, forced to stand under the sun as punishment, a small price to pay. The tunnel survived. By day 392, the tunnel had grown deep enough that a new problem emerged. Oxygen. The air inside was thinning. One digger passed out underground. His partner dragged him out just in time. They needed ventilation, and they needed it fast. The solution came from plastic soda bottles. They taped dozens of them together, end to end, creating a long pipe that ran the entire length of the tunnel. At one end, they built a handed pump, a crude device that pushed air through the pipe and into the deepest sections. They also strung electrical lights through the tunnel, disguising the power cord as a cable for a stereo system. Then came another threat no one could control: an earthquake. Chile sits on one of the most active seismic zones on the planet. When the ground shook, Montano rushed into the tunnel to check on the digger inside. The walls held. No collapse, no damage. 18 months of work survived in those few terrifying seconds. Would the tunnel hold for the final push? By day 558, Montano's team pushed a rod through the earth above them. Pink liquid was pumped through the opening and surfaced outside the prison walls. A contact on the outside confirmed the position. The tunnel had crossed the prison border, but it wasn't far enough. The exit point was still 40 meters short of the abandoned railway station where they planned to emerge. They kept digging. By the end of 1989, something extraordinary was happening outside the prison walls. Chile was changing. A national plebiscite had rejected Pinochet's bid to extend his rule. Democratic elections had been held in December 1989. Patricio Aylwin, a civilian, had won the presidency. He would take office on March 11, 1990. The transition to democracy was 6 weeks away, but for the prisoners inside the Santiago public jail, democracy meant nothing. 10 of them still faced death sentences. The new government had promised to free political prisoners, but with a critical exception. Those who had participated in acts of violence would remain behind bars. The men who had tried to kill Pinochet would not be freed. The tunnel was their only way out. January 29, 1990. The day had finally come. 18 months of digging, 24 men who knew the secret, 55 tons of dirt hidden in the ceiling above their heads, 60 meters of tunnel running beneath the Santiago public jail under the street, over the metro line, and out toward the abandoned railway station. Montesino divided his 24 men into 4 units. The first was a vanguard team of 3, led by Manuel Fuelita. Their mission was to break through the final barrier at the tunnel exit and clear the way out. A support team waited on the outside, commanded by Hugo Nenuleo. The second unit was the largest, 11 men under Ricardo Contreras. Their mission was simple: lie flat in the tunnel, wait, stay calm, move when ordered. The third was a containment unit, led by German Alfaro. If the guards detected the operation, these men would hold them off, buy time for the others. The fourth was the command unit, 3 men led by Montano himself. They would be the last ones out, closing the operation behind them. There was one painful absence. Santiago Montenegro, the head of counterintelligence for the operation, had fallen seriously ill. He couldn't make the crawl. After 18 months of planning, he was left behind. 9:00 p.m. The prisoners gathered in the television room for the weekly night entertainment. A movie was playing. Guards stood watch at the exits. Everything appeared normal. Then, one by one, prisoners began to leave quietly, casually, as if the movie wasn't interesting enough. Nobody noticed. Not the guards, not the other prisoners. They made their way to cell 4, gallery 78. The block was removed. The tunnel entrance gaped open. 9:30 p.m. The vanguard team entered first. 3 men crawling through 60 centimeters of darkness. The plastic bottle ventilation pipe hissed softly. The lights strung along the walls cast a dim yellow glow. The earth pressed against their shoulders on both sides. What if the tunnel collapsed now? What if the exit was blocked? Outside the prison, the support team waited near the abandoned railway station. They had tools ready to break through from their end. 10:15 p.m. The vanguard reached the exit point. The earth was packed hard. They dug upward, clawing, scraping, and then fresh air rushed in. Cold January night air. They were through. The signal traveled back through the tunnel. A single word through the communication system: salmon. It meant one thing: go. 10:20 p.m. The second unit began moving. 11 men crawling through the tunnel one after another. Behind them, the containment unit. Behind them, the command team. 24 men in a 60-centimeter tunnel moving in total silence. The only sound was breathing and the soft scrape of bodies against earth. But inside the prison, something was going wrong. A prisoner named Bigote had noticed the empty cells. He was an informant, the kind who traded information for cigarettes. He slipped away from the television room and headed toward Gallery 78. A wheelchair-bound prisoner tried to block his path, tried to stall him, but Bigote shoved past. He reached the cell. The tunnel entrance was still open. The last men were preparing to enter. Bigote turned to run to alert the guards. A man named Oscar was the last one waiting to enter the tunnel. He grabbed Bigote. A struggle, a screwdriver. Bigote went down, unconscious, but Oscar was injured in the fight. The wound was severe enough to slow him down. He couldn't enter the tunnel. The last of the 24 disappeared underground. Oscar stayed behind, bleeding, alone. Could the remaining prisoners find the tunnel in time? 11 p.m. Outside the abandoned railway station, men emerged from the earth one by one, covered in dirt, gasping for air, free. For the first time in years, no walls surrounded them, no guard towers, no searchlights, no snipers, just the night sky over Santiago, just the sound of the Mapu River flowing nearby, just freedom. The air tasted different outside those walls, cooler, cleaner. For the first time in years, they could breathe without counting the minutes until the next guard patrol. No one was watching. No one was counting heads. Some of them had been locked up for over 4 years. Others had entered the prison expecting never to leave alive. 10 of them had been sentenced to death. And now they stood in the open air, covered in dirt, hands bleeding, free. But how long would freedom last? Supporters from the Communist Party waited with a bus. An ordinary city bus, headlights on, engine running, a driver behind the wheel, as if it were picking up passengers on a regular route. One by one, the 24 men boarded. They were given money, fake identification documents, clean clothes. Each man was told where to get off. At each stop, a contact waited with a code phrase. The escapee would say the phrase, the contact would respond, and then a car would take them to a safe house. By midnight, the 24 men who had built the tunnel were scattered across Santiago, hidden in safe houses in La Flita, Point Alto, and other working-class neighborhoods. But the tunnel was still open. Back inside the prison, the other inmates discovered the empty cells, found the hole in the floor of cell 4, and they made a decision. 25 more prisoners entered the tunnel. Men who had known nothing about the plan until that very moment. They crawled through the same 60 meters, emerged at the same railway station. Some made it out. Some were caught near the exit. How long before the guards discovered the truth? 2:30 a.m., January 30th, 1990. Hours after the first man entered the tunnel, the prison guards finally detected the escape. The alarm shattered the silence of the Santiago night. Guards rushed to Gallery 78, found the open tunnel entrance, found the empty cells, found unconscious on the floor, found Oscar injured nearby. The scale of the disaster hit them immediately. 49 prisoners gone. Colonel Horacio Oja, the head of Chile's national prison system, received the call. The news was catastrophic. Among the escapees were 13 members of the Manuel Rodriguez Patriotic Front, charged with the 1986 assassination attempt on Pinochet. 10 of them had been sentenced to death, 3 to life imprisonment. Colonel Christian Lab, the government secretary general, called an emergency meeting. He declared the situation of the greatest gravity. Every security force in Chile was mobilized. Police set up roadblocks on every major road leaving Santiago. Helicopters with blazing searchlights swept across the city. Armed officers with automatic weapons and dogs searched the streets. Hundreds of pedestrians were stopped and detained. Vehicles were searched at every checkpoint. The borders were sealed. Diplomatic offices were placed under surveillance. Santiago newspapers ran the story as front-page news the next morning. The headlines called it the Great Escape, an escape for the movies, the largest prison break in Chilean history. But 42 of the 49 were already hidden, scattered across the city in safe houses, untraceable. 7 were recaptured in the hours immediately following the escape. 6 were caught at police checkpoints shortly after fleeing the tunnel exit. A 7th never made it out at all. He was too large to fit through the 20-inch square tunnel exit. Guards found him wedged at the mouth, unable to move forward or backward. What happened to the 42 who vanished? The aftermath was swift and brutal. On January 31st, Colonel Ojeda resigned. The head of Chile's prison system system forced out in disgrace. The largest security failure under Pinochet's regime had happened on his watch. A judge was granted full authority to investigate the escape. Police committees organized draguette operations and raids across Santiago. The search expanded nationwide. Investigators entered the tunnel and were stunned by what they found. It wasn't just a hole in the ground. Police described it as a real work of engineering. The tunnel was equipped with electrical lighting powered by wires disguised as stereo cables, a ventilation system built from taped-together plastic soda bottles and a hand-powered air pump, a rail system with carts on runners designed to transport dirt from the excavation. The ceiling above Gallery 78 told the rest of the story. 55 tons of earth packed between the ceiling and the roof of the cell block, hidden in plain sight for 18 months. Authorities were baffled. How had 10 truckloads of dirt been moved without a single guard noticing? Some officials speculated that the tunnel might have been dug from the outside. Others suggested that visitors had carried dirt out during visiting hours, but the statement released by 5 of the escapees told the truth. 24 men had dug the tunnel from inside the prison starting in early 1989, according to their public statement. In reality, the work had begun even earlier in 1988. The escapees released 2 statements through phone calls to Santiago radio stations and news media. One identified 5 escapees by name, including Alfredo Malric Baltra, Victor Diaz Caro, brothers Mauricio and Arnaldo Arenas Rojos, Juan Moreno Ayla, and Claudio Molina Donoso. The statement declared that after years of unjust imprisonment, of systematic violation of the right to due process, of scorn and violation of all our rights and brutal tortures, they had recovered their freedom. The streets of Santiago erupted, not in fear, in celebration. Relatives of the prisoners gathered outside the jail and cheered. Crowds formed in working-class neighborhoods. Impromptu street parties broke out across the city. People chanted songs mocking Pinochet. One of the most popular chants went, "With knives, with spoons, the boys got away. How long could 42 fugitives stay hidden in a city under siege?" The answer was remarkable. Most of them were never recaptured. The safe house network held. The fake identities worked. Some remained hidden in Chile for years. Others fled the country entirely. Eduardo Rosener, one of the 24 tunnel builders, escaped to Argentina and then to Cuba. He was 24 years old when he crawled through that tunnel. In Cuba, he studied veterinary medicine, earned a master's degree in epidemiology. He returned to Chile in 2009, nearly 20 years later, and revalidated his degree at the University of Chile. Eduardo Asenjo, the 20th man to exit the tunnel, stayed in Chile. He enrolled at a university under his own name, studied economics, got a new national identification card, started businesses, a clothing factory, a furniture workshop. He wasn't recaptured until 2004, 14 years after the escape. Marcos Raquelme, the 49th name on the fugitive list published the day after the escape, was eventually recaptured. He spent several months back in prison before being released. He continued his political work and decades later still served as coordinator of the Manuel Rodriguez patriotic movement. The escape occurred just 6 weeks before Patricio Aylwin took office as Chile's first civilian president since the 1973 coup. The transition to democracy changed everything. Many political prisoners were eventually released. The charges against some of the escapees were dropped or reduced over the years. The irony was inescapable. The men who dug for 18 months to win their freedom might have been freed by democracy within weeks, but they didn't know that at the time. And for the 10 men facing death sentences, waiting was not an option. The Santiago public jail tunnel escape of 1990 remains the largest prison break in Chilean history. 49 men, 60 meters of tunnel, 55 tons of earth hidden in a ceiling, 18 months of digging with spoons, kitchen knives, and 1 screwdriver, a ventilation system built from soda bottles, lighting powered by a stereo cable, and a regular city bus waiting outside to carry them to freedom. To this day, the men who built the tunnel gather every January 29th at the Casa Boulevard in Santiago. They call it their second birthday, the day they crawled through the earth and came out the other side. Miguel Montesino, the man who started it all, said it best. These were facts of life, facts filled with hope and dignity. Each one of us dug his own meter of freedom. The escape was dubbed Operation Success by the Chilean public, but the 24 men who dug the tunnel had their own name for it. They called it Lolita. The escape forced Chile to confront the reality of its political prisoners, the problem of human rights, the torture, the disappearances. Issues that the dictatorship had buried were dragged into the open. The new democratic government could no longer ignore them. In that sense, the tunnel did more than free 49 men. It cracked open a conversation that Chile had been avoiding for 17 years. And that brings us to the end of our story. If you liked it, don't forget to like and subscribe and activate the bell button so you can receive new videos.